A Shadowcat appeared at the top of the ramp, a medium-weight Omni-Mech favored for Novacat frontline galaxies. It had back-canted legs, a hunched thrusting torso, and a barrel of a powerful Gauss rifle replacing the entire right arm. Zane almost gasped aloud at the mech's paint scheme, however. Garish colors had been slapped on haphazardly and rows of glyphs had been painted down the sides of his legs. I'd like to imagine that somewhere in the DCMS Mechwarrior handbooks and digital curriculum, there's a section on clan medium Omni-Mechs that just reads, "Dangerous at any distance. Handle with care." The story of the Shadowcat is one that takes us through the jealousy and competition that drove interclan politics down through the tumultuous clan invasion years and up into the dawn of the IlClan era. This 45-ton Omni-Mech has hit above its weight for so long that it has become an iconic example of the swift and brutal efficiency of clan technology. Originally conceived as a challenger to the noble Fenris Omni-Mech, primarily fielded by Clan Wolf, Clan Novacat wanted their own 45-ton mech that could not only match the Fenris' speed, but also vastly outperform it with plenty of pod space for weapons and equipment. This was accomplished through the use of a hard-mounted Myomer accelerator signal circuitry system added to the center torso. This allowed the Shadowcat to briefly match the 129 km/h top speed of the Fenris. With a smaller 270XL engine and fewer hard-mounted double heatsinks, the Shadowcat's designers could boast about the mech's 17 tons of available pod space. Though this couldn't quite match the prolific 23 tons of the Stormcrow, it was one more ton than the Nova, a mech a full 5 tons heavier than the Shadowcat. This gave the Novacat warriors a lot of flexibility concerning loadouts and mission profiles for the battlemech. The other significant difference in comparison to the Fenris was the hard-mounted jump jets, which allowed the Shadowcat to leap up to 180 meters. With a movement profile of 696 and briefly 612.6 with the mask engaged, the Shadowcat could easily meet the criteria of being an incredibly agile battlemech. The Shadowcat's 7 tons of compound H-17 ferrofibrous armor could almost match the Fenris' 7.5 tons, but a win is a win for the Fenris on this aspect of their designs. Compared to other Inner Sphere 45-tonners, the Shadowcat still comes out ahead, if just slightly. First produced in 3003 on Barcella in the clan homeworlds, the Shadowcat was a relative newcomer to the Omni-Mech pantheon that would descend upon the Inner Sphere with Operation Revival. Though originally just found within the Novacat Tumen, the value of the Shadowcat was recognized quickly by the other clans, who either traded for it or obtained the mech through salvage and trials. When the clans began to hit the planets of the Russelhague Republic and the Draconis Combine, the Shadowcat was well represented among the forces of the Smoke Jaguars and Clan Wolf. The primary configuration of the Shadowcat featured a Gauss rifle placed into the right arm and fed by 2 tons of ammunition in the right torso. When combined with the active probe in the left torso, the Shadowcat Prime became an effective scout medium that could act as a headhunter should the opportunity arise. The ability to stalk prey and lash out when the time was right led to the mech's reputation for living up to its name. In addition to the Gauss rifle, 2 ER medium lasers provided the mech some mid and short-range firepower. Split between the left arm and right torso, the power of those clan ER medium lasers was only underestimated by the foolish Mechwarrior. Overall, the primary configuration was a meat-and-potatoes build that allowed the Shadowcat to cause significant damage at long range and really couldn't be countered thanks to its ability to speed away from threats by engaging its mask or by using its jump jets. The best an opponent could hope for was getting lucky with return fire at long range, often on a Shadowcat that had just leapt into view and was pretty hard to hit. We're going to mix things up for the first alternate configuration and discuss the Shadowcat TC. This unique use of the platform was not common before the Battle of Tukayyid, but in the years following that debacle, it was seen more and more often among Shadowcat mech warriors. With the Comguard relying upon avoiding dueling in favor of hit-and-run attacks and the use of tanks and infantry, the TC Shadowcats thrived thanks to the swap from the Gauss rifle to a more accurate LB-10X autocannon in the right arm. Backed up by an SRM-4 launcher as well as 2 small pulse lasers and an active probe, the Shadowcat was able to hunt down small units fleeing from ambush positions. In one Tukayyid battle report, a Steel Viper Shadowcat descended into a deadly game of cat and mouse in a place called Devil's Bath. Stalking a crab piloted by Adept Delia Dietz of the Comguard 6th Division, The clan mech warriors swerved and dodged around the dense granite columns and hydrothermal mud pits that filled the site. After hours of circling each other and taking shots wherever they could, they were far from backup as the battle had progressed elsewhere. Ultimately, the crab's luck ran out when it turned a blind corner and walked into the right arm muzzle of the Steel Viper's LB-10X. The cluster round penetrated the crab's cockpit and dealt a mortal blow to Adept Dietz. The report of the fight continues when the crab began to fall backward into one of the mud pits. The Shadowcat's mech warriors spent the effort and took the risk of being dragged down into the pit along with his defeated opponent by grabbing the falling mech. Having built such a great amount of respect for the fallen Comguard mech warrior, the Steel Viper mech warrior left his mech, retrieved her mortally wounded body from the crab's shattered cockpit, and laid her gently on the ground. In a rare moment of compassion and respect, he stayed with Adept Dietz until she died, before saluting her and returning to his Shadowcat. This stands as a reminder that as different as the cultures of the clans were after centuries of isolation, there remained some common ground in respect for fighting the good fight and holding the line. The Shadowcat TC was seen in action at several points during the Steel Viper shenanigans back in the clan homeworlds, specifically during the conflict with Clan Snowraven and during the Wars of Reaving. Mech warriors in light and medium mechs would be wise to be wary of the TC should they spot the enemy Shadowcat out in the field. Beyond her, Ragnar had closed to middling range with his foe. That left him vulnerable to the Shadowcat's extended range large lasers, a fact proved by both weapons slicing deeply into the armor of the Fenris's right arm and leg. That damage hardly slowed Ragnar down because his quartet of return shots all hit. The medium pulse lasers flayed the armor from both of the Shadowcat's arms and started to pick away at the naked limb's internal structures. One heatsink exploded in a cloud of yellow-green vapor. Despite the damage done to each of the smaller mechs, their pilots managed to keep them upright and functional. Now, if carrying a big ballistic weapon isn't your jam, the alternate configuration A might be the pick for you. It addresses the ammunition dependence for both the primary and TC configurations with a reliance upon a pair of ER large lasers as the mech's primary weapons. They're split between the right and left arms and backed up by a Streak SRM-6 in the right torso. The active probe remained from the primary config, but in order to tackle the heat generated by the large lasers, 3 additional double heat sinks were added to the Shadowcat, bringing the total to 13. The 1-2 punch from the ER large lasers didn't diminish the long-range power of the config A, but the mech warrior had to be careful when jumping lest the mech build up excess heat. The 2 tons of ammunition for the Streak SRM-6 helped the config A operate away from logistics lines for extended periods of time. Overall, the A configuration was incredibly solid and a clear rival of the primary for providing the best possible long-range headhunting fire. The last of the original 3003 official configurations was the B, which is our Operation Sneaky Sneak choice for providing unexpected flurries of long-range missiles from cover. Both the left and right arms wielded an LRM-15 with Artemis IV fire control systems, which was arguably the mech's primary weapons, though they were backed up by a pair of ER medium lasers. In addition to the active probe, an ECM suite was added to the left torso to provide the mech with the opportunity to conceal movement until the time was right to strike. While the LRMs are limited in their usefulness with only 16 shots per launcher, surviving that long to run out of ammo likely meant the Configuration B Shadowcat had done its job well. The Shadowcat B is a solid fire support medium mech that can still get into the fray if necessary. I'm not totally sure how this happened, but the original configurations are all each quite useful and effective. That cannot be said for many of the other Clan Invasion era Omnimechs. Torian manipulated his right-hand joystick, and the right arm-mounted Gauss rifle of his fearsome Shadowcat moved skyward. The golden targeting reticule on the forward view screen matched up with the bright white speck of a Comguard aerospace fighter arrowing across the field. His computer tagged it as a 30-ton SPAD. Computer-aided math, along with his genetic predisposition and a lifetime of harsh training across worlds 1,000 light-years from this one, lined up a shot well ahead of the aircraft. The nickel-ferrous slug discharged in front of a wave of electromagnetic energy and flew true, smashing into the craft, tearing away slabs of armor that flashed as they were gyrated toward the ground. Hopping down the timeline to 3054, the Shadowcat M configuration started to gain popularity among clan warriors who wanted a purely energy weapon build that could still pack a considerable punch. The M config relied upon 2 large pulse lasers split between the arms to do most of the heavy lifting. Of course, if you're familiar with the clan large pulse laser, it is an absolute monster, being able to pump out a consistent 10 damage every turn out to 20 hexes. To add rapid onset combustion to misery, 2 ER medium lasers were added to the mech, split between the left and right torsos. 3 additional heat sinks were necessary to keep the mech from becoming a hotbox, though it still could be if the ER medium lasers were brought into play too often. However, 26 heat dissipation was the sweet spot for firing both large pulse lasers and leaping the full 6 hexes with jump jets. Doing so would still leave the mech heat neutral under standard conditions. What was missing from the Configuration M was the active probe, which was part of the mech's charm from earlier configurations. It's up to the mech warrior to decide if wielding 2 large pulse lasers like an absolute maniac is worth the cost. In 3061, the Shadowcat Configuration C showed an effort to keep the mech relevant through the addition of new technology. In addition to 3 ER medium lasers split between the arms and the left torso, 2 advanced Tactical Missile 6 launchers were installed. They were aided by the addition of a NARC missile beacon in the right torso. While the ATM launchers provided flexibility concerning missile types depending upon mission and warrior preference, the common pool of just 3 tons of ammunition could feel a little stifling. Though it is 30 shots overall, split between the 2 launchers, a single ton of any one type could go quickly. Oddly enough, the NARC launcher has the opposite problem with 2 tons of beacons to fire. 12 shots would be an accomplishment considering how close the Shadowcat would have to get to a target to achieve a hit. It would be good advice for any warrior handed the C configuration to request the tech swap 1 ton of beacon ammunition for an additional ton of ATM missiles. Just 1 year later, in 3062, the Shadowcat D was spotted, which was built around an ER large laser in the right arm but featured largely close-range weaponry. 3 medium pulse lasers provided accurate fire, and they were backed up by a Streak SRM-6 in the right torso. Finally, an emotional support ER small laser was placed into the left torso along with a pair of machine guns to deal with any pesky infantry that needed to be rendered into confetti. The Config D is a strong close-range build that doesn't completely give up the Shadowcat's ability to be a pain at long range. An 11th double heatsink was added to keep the mech's heat down, though it will be an issue if jump jetting the full distance and firing everything. The most likely path would be to trade off the ER large laser shot for a litany of short-range stuff once you get closer to the mech's prey. The Shadowcat D is a solid brawler medium that could be worth taking into battle if you want to pick on some lights or take out some infantry and battle armor. After quite a good run of solid configurations, the Shadowcat H is a bit of a wild card with the installation of a large heavy laser and targeting computer combo. It was paired with an LRM-20 aided by an Artemis fire control system in the left torso. The value of the Shadowcat H is likely going to boil down to how you feel about putting all the eggs into one basket with the large heavy laser. It does do 16 damage out to 15 hexes, but the 18 heat is substantial. Thankfully, the H config has 14 double heat sinks, so it can fire the laser and the LRM-20 while on the run without generating excess heat. The only issue arises if firing both weapons while leaping the full distance on jump jets. Still, you can do that for several turns before the excess heat starts to impact performance. My personal reservations arise from the addition of that targeting computer for just that single weapon, since it doesn't impact the missile launcher. Also, the 2 tons of ammunition for the LRM-20 could go quickly, leaving the Shadowcat with just a single weapon, albeit a very strong one. In 3071, a more controversial configuration was spotted. In what was deemed the Shadowcat J, the mech wielded a Hyper-Assault Gauss Rifle 20 in the right arm along with 2 tons of ammunition. Doing 20 damage out to 24 hexes was an attractive proposition, though critics are quick to point out the damage is doled out in 5-point clusters, which can seem less than impressive against prey with thick hides. The active probe made its return in the left torso, and the remaining gear consisted of 6 AP Gauss rifles split between the left torso and left arm. The 1 ton of ammunition provided 40 shots. The Shadowcat J is a good example of a niche loadout, as the limited ammunition for both the AP Gauss and the HAG-20 could render it defenseless in anything but the shortest of battles. While I would hesitate to call the configuration bad, it's clear that it would suffer outside of its narrow mission profile. The elementals weren't entering the forest, but had set up a skirmish line while waiting for their mech support. A 45-ton Shadowcat soon appeared, most likely armed with a Gauss rifle. Jefferson swore. Elementals were bad, but a clan version of his mech could inflict quite a bit of damage before it went down. As we march down the timeline, we're encountering more and more bizarre attempts to use the Shadowcat chassis. The Configuration E demonstrates this as the two large improved heavy lasers completely eclipse the ability of the 17 double heatsinks to wick away the 18 heat generated per laser shot. Running, or Kerensky forbid jumping when firing both weapons, would easily leave the E config deep into the red. Thankfully, 2 coolant pods were added to the right torso to keep the mech from going up like a 3-month-old Christmas tree. I can see the Configuration E being quite useful as a headhunter, though the Mechwarrior inside would need to know when to pull punches and when to lay into a target with both lasers. Use the Config E selectively or when you really want to see an opponent rage. Leaping down the timeline, the Shadowcat F is the first of the official configurations which I wouldn't use and would actively discourage others from using. The ERPPC in the left torso is fine and the Streak SRM-6 is no issue. The installation of the TS-EMP cannon is where I'm throwing up my hands. The TS-EMP is one of those weapons that I really regret was added to the universe because it violates some pretty basic tenets of what makes tabletop gaming fun. For those not already initiated, the TS-EMP can completely shut down an otherwise undamaged battle mech on a roll of a dice. Doing this is a great way to make the opponent feel helpless, and it takes them out of the game. If you want someone to keep playing the game and coming back time and time again, those are 2 things you don't really want to do. It's one thing to put yourself into a position where a lucky head hit by a Gauss rifle takes you out. It's another to see the helpless mech on the field just take unanswered fire. If you want to introduce a new player to the game or keep a friend playing, I'd suggest you not bring the Shadowcat F. In 3136, the Shadowcat I burst into the scene sporting an interesting mix of energy weapons and missile launchers. The longest range weapons were a pair of ER medium pulse lasers, aided by a targeting computer. The targeting computer returned them to the -2 to hit, but only out to 14 hexes. This Shadowcat lacked the long-range weaponry of so many other configurations. Backing up the ER medium pulse lasers, at 12 hexes were a pair of Streak SRM-6s split between the left and right torsos. That hefty short-range punch was then aided by a pair of medium improved heavy lasers that could reach out to 9 hexes. The configuration's 11 double heatsinks are woefully incapable of sinking the heat generated by an Alpha Strike while at a standstill, let alone leaping on jump jets. Most of the time, a Mechwarrior is going to be forced to rely upon the ER medium pulse lasers and Streak SRMs. The 7 heat generated by each improved heavy laser makes them a sometimes weapon only when close to a target. Overall, it's an okay configuration, but I think there are much better options in the Shadowcat pantheon. Our last official configuration is the Shadowcat T, and it was first spotted in 3142. Shockingly, after the past couple of configurations, the T is quite chill as far as late Dark Age, early IlClan era loadouts tend to go. The Ultra AC-10 autocannon was chosen for the right arm, and it was backed up by a pair of medium pulse lasers. Finally, the traditional active probe makes a reappearance. The 2 tons of ammunition are acceptable for the UAC-10, though that ammunition could feel like it's going quick if you're double firing consistently. Heat is absolutely no issue even when leaping the full 6 hexes. The usefulness of the Shadowcat T is likely going to boil down to how you feel about the UAC-10 in comparison to some of the other older offerings for primary damage weapons. Personally, if I'm going to go with a ballistics weapons build, I'd probably just go with a Shadowcat Prime's Gauss rifle. Now before we go, I do want to share the Mechfrog MF configuration, which I think offers something unique outside of the official configs. If you'll indulge me, I present to you the Shadowcat MF. Sporting a large pulse laser in the right arm, the MF retains the ability to cause damage at long range. Just slightly behind it at 18 hex max range, the noble plasma cannon in the left arm can throw a wrench into the plans of enemies that enjoy dancing on the heat curve. At 15 hexes, 2 ER medium lasers come into play, and they can ruin someone's entire day with the tried and true 7 damage apiece. Of course, we need an emotional support ER small laser, and that one's located in the left torso. For close range brawling or liquefying infantry, 6 machine guns are evenly distributed across the arms and the left torso. While not putting up any big numbers in specific locations, the Shadowcat MF could be quite useful as a sandblaster or as a hunter of lighter battle mechs and battle armor. The plasma cannon can decimate formations of troops if given the opportunity. The MF's 12 double heat sinks are adequate for general use, but once the ER medium lasers come into play, careful heat management will be necessary. If you want to try out the Shadowcat MF configuration, I've included the link to the record sheet in the video notes below. In the years since the Shadowcat first stalked out onto the battlefields in 3003, the mech has earned its reputation as a sleek hunter, and not just from its low-profile trait. The entire mech's skulking, predatory look has added to its mystique. Standing at the dawn of the IlClan era, the Shadowcat can still be found within the Inner Sphere, though as of 3071 it isn't produced any longer among the clan homeworlds. It has been reported among all of the Inner Sphere-based clans, and even among house and mercenary organizations now that Clan Seafox is producing and selling the design. It seems that any hope you had for escaping the Shadowcat's wrath by heading down the timeline has been dashed. Sorry, not sorry. So why do we love the Shadowcat? Well, it's a solid platform that highlights just about any clan weaponry put on it. Almost all the standard configurations are useful in a wide variety of situations, and what more could you ask for from a 45-ton clan mech? Thank you as always for coming by today to talk some BattleTech. If you enjoyed the video and feel it's worthy, don't forget the thumbs up button, and even hitting subscribe will make it that much more likely you'll see my nonsense in the future. For those who have taken the extra step of becoming channel members or supported on Ko-fi, thank you very much. Without you, none of this would be possible. Until we meet again, please take care of yourself and your loved ones by making the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.